A northern road at night narrows the world to whatever the headlights admit. Past that thin cone of light, there is only moving snow and a feeling like the earth has slipped away. I'd been running the Dalton long enough to know better than to trust a line of paint or a promise from the weather report. But I still told myself the same lie every driver tells in a whiteout. Keep the tires between the ruts, keep the wipers going, keep your breathing measured, and you'll make it to the next fuel stop. My name is Roy Calder. I haul packaged chemicals to a site that smells like bad pennies and lives under towers that blink red even when the sun never properly rises. That night I was 2 hours behind after chaining up for a stretch that turned the world to chalk dust. The heater rattled. The coffee in my travel mug tasted like burnt plastic and pennies. Somewhere behind me, in the dark of the sleeper, my spare boots thumped together with every drift. The radio muttered with the tired voices of men I only knew by handles and habits. You learn habits. Count the wiper shrieks. Check the gauges in order: oil, water, amps, air. Sip, swallow, breathe. Scan the shoulder for shadow or movement. In weather like that, you also learn to stop thinking about home, because picturing a warm kitchen and the expensive dog your ex kept will tilt you into self-pity, and self-pity makes you sloppy. I kept my mind on practical things: where the next pullout might be, how much de-icer I had, whether the guy in the plow ahead was the one who liked to nap on the job or the one who sang hymns into the CB after midnight. I reached mile marker 217 during the worst of it. The storm didn't howl. It pressed. The flakes came sideways, small and endless, like dust shaken from a blanket the size of sky. The reflector posts on the shoulder appeared as pale blurs and vanished before I could be sure what I'd seen. That's when the shape resolved out of the static. A person, small and still, standing right where the packed snow sloped down into the ditch. A thumb stuck out. The hand shook so slightly I thought it was the wind. I had no business stopping. You tell yourself that before you do the decent thing to make it sound like a choice. She wore no proper coat, only a light sweater the color of dishwater, and her hair was the same wet color as the road. Bare head, no hat, no pack. She didn't look up when my high beams washed her in white. I downshifted, felt the trailer give a stubborn shove, and eased onto the shoulder where tire tracks had carved a hard ridge. The truck came to a hissing stop. For a second there was only the tick of cooling metal and the small, furious sound of the storm. I leaned across and popped the passenger latch. It stuck like it always did in the cold. I had to thump it with my fist. The door swung open to a slab of moving white and a wind that chewed its way up my sleeve and into my bones. "You'll freeze to death," I said, loud enough to hear myself above the heater. "Get in." She did not move. Her thumb lowered. The hand dropped to her side. Her face, thin, pale, young enough to still be living with somebody's rules, turned a fraction, but her eyes never quite found mine. I reached across for the handle to pull the door shut and felt the cab shudder as a gust tried to take it. In the heartbeat, my eyes were on the road again. Just to check for a plow or a bad decision in my mirror, she was suddenly inside. There was no sound of boots on step, no weight on the seat. One glance, and she was where a person would be if a door had shut and a life had continued. I flinched hard enough that the truck rocked. My tongue felt too big for my mouth. "Seatbelt," I said, because the mouth remembers the rules even when the head does not. She didn't reach for it. She folded her hands like a child in a picture from a church basement. Shrunk into herself. If she was shaking, it was an inward thing you saw in the corners of your eyes. "Where you headed?" I asked, and the words steamed the air like I was outside without a scarf. No answer. "You from Cold Ridge?" "There's a clinic there." I waited. Her lips parted and stayed that way a heartbeat too long, as if speech were a thing she had set down and misplaced. My radio crackled with a cough of static and then a voice that sounded like Waltz from Rosedale Freight. "You pulled over, Roy. You losing gaskets or your head?" he said. 227's a bad spot to stop." "I'm fine," I lied. "Picking up a stray?" I glanced at her again. She was closer. I hadn't seen her move. The seat hadn't squeaked. She had covered a foot of the bench the way dusk covers a room. Wet wool smell. Under that, the sharp mineral reek you get when you crack open a cold trailer. My palms sweated into my gloves. The wipers found a rhythm that matched my breath. Scrape, inhale. Scrape, exhale. The road tunneled down to a hole the size of a window. I told myself that a scared girl could slide across a seat without making a sound. I told myself I had missed it. "What's your name?" I asked. Her head turned enough that I saw a sliver of profile. Soft chin, frost-stuck lashes, a pale ear with no earring. "Stop the truck," she whispered. It didn't sound like a request. It sounded like my own thought repeated back to me in a voice scraped thin. I checked the mirrors. The storm gave me nothing but white. "Can't stop here," I said. "No pullout. We'll ice in." She didn't answer. The storm did. The wind found some new angle and forced itself under the door seal with a cat's hiss. The CB spat a string of numbers from a guy warning about a jackknifed rig near Hensley Cut. The gauges held where they should, but my world shrank another inch. I took another sip of coffee and tasted pennies. When I looked again, she was closer. Shoulder to shoulder now. No breath fog, no heat. The wet smell got stronger, and under it something like rusted water from an old pipe. My neck prickled the way it does when you pass a wreck and know there's more to see than flashing lights. "Seatbelt," I said again, stupidly. "Law says." "Stop," she said, and her mouth barely moved. I pulled air into my lungs until it hurt. "We'll stop at Cold Ridge," I said. 10 minutes. There's a big tank lit up blue. You can warm up. They'll loan a parka." The picture of the tank was as much for me as for her. Something fixed. Bright, immune to snow. I dipped my eyes to the speedometer. 32. Safer than it felt. And when I lifted them, her head was right by my ear. The move should have taken time, a shift of weight at least, a squeak. It took nothing. "Mile marker," she whispered, the words blowing cold into the warmest parts of me. 217. The wheel twitched in my hands. The truck followed the small lie my body told it. We drifted toward the shoulder, toward where the road broke off into loose white that would grab a set of tires like hands. I hauled it back with a yelp I didn't recognize as my own. The trailer pushed me like an insult. Everything went quiet the way it does right before a glass you've knocked wobbles off the counter. "Roy?" Walt said in my ear, voice sharp now. "What are you doing?" "Nothing," I said, and heard the wobble plain. The girl had her hands folded again. Water dripped a steady line from her hair to the mat. It didn't puddle. It vanished as it fell, like the truck had no floor for it to hit. I pressed my knee into the wheel and tried to remember every cautionary story I had ever been told about this road. Men who stopped to help and were never found. Rigs discovered idling neat as a parked car with no driver in sight. A pair of boot tracks that walked out into a field of unbroken snow and then stopped like the sky had picked them up. I reached for the passenger door to prove she had weight enough to slam it shut. My fingers brushed the handle and the steel stung cold through the glove. The door did not move. The handle did not rattle. The wipers counted the seconds while I held my breath. "You can't keep driving," she said, and there was a child's certainty in it that almost undid me. "Watch me," I said. "We'll make Cold Ridge. You can call whoever you need." He didn't stop, she said. It wasn't to me. It was as if she were telling the storm a fact it already knew. He kept going. He said the road would make room. He left me to stand. A brake light bloomed ahead where the white thinned over a rise. A plow crawling, its orange lamp throbbing like a heartbeat seen through skin. Relief struck so hard my eyes watered. I eased behind it, letting its blade carve me a path. The girl didn't look at it. Her attention stayed on the windshield as if the storm held a face I wasn't allowed to see. I thought of the mile marker again. 217. I thought of the stories. There had been a wreck out here, the older hand said, before my time. A sedan crushed under the plow's tailgate when the driver tried to pass in white like this. A girl thrown clear into the ditch. The driver crawled out without a scratch and claimed he never saw her. Some said he walked away down the road, calm as a preacher, and by the time help came, there were no prints to show where he'd gone. A tale polished by retellings, which is another way to say a truth people don't want to update. The plow angled off at a wayside. I could have followed. I should have. Instead, I kept the nose pointed north because the line of the road is the only promise a tired man trusts. The girl leaned toward the glass the way people hunger for windows on airplanes. "Do you remember being warm?" she asked. I flinched. The question was not for me, but it landed like I owed her an answer. My chest hurt with the effort of behaving like a person who had not accepted something impossible into his cab. I remember my mother's kitchen. Canned soup in a dented pot. A green towel on the chair by the door. I hadn't thought of that towel in 20 years. The memory felt borrowed, like someone else had slid it across the table to me. The radio went to static again and then to a voice I didn't know. "I'll pull your rig over if you can't see the rail," it said. "Another one gone south of 90. Don't add yourself to the count." That last sentence had the feel of someone who'd been told to sound cheerful in a bad place. "Stop the truck," she said, soft as a breath on a window. I saw the sign for Cold Ridge in the dazzle, blue tank with a white stripe, the thing I'd promised into being and knew with a small, precise dread that I would not stop there. The fear had changed shape. I wasn't afraid of her any longer. I was afraid of what stopping would make real. If I pulled in and she stayed, if I saw her under the sodium lights where everything looks honest, then I would have to decide what a man does inside a story he's been mocking for years. The road rose, fell, rose. The storm shifted, a curtain pulling aside and then dropping back with a magician's timing. The girl lifted her hand and pressed 2 fingers to the glass like she wanted to touch the wind. Frost limned the prints. The marks did not fog and fade. They deepened, spread, branching into delicate veins like leaf skeletons, until the whole window wore the shape of her touch. Cold leaked inward and snuck into my teeth. The engine note changed just enough to make me think of failure. I eased off the throttle to listen. In the instant my eyes left the white, the girl's mouth was at my ear. "He said he'd come back," she said. "He said I should wait by the marker because the marker meant a place, and a place is safer than the space between." I waited until the wind ran out of numbers. I don't remember choosing to speak. "What happened to him?" She didn't answer. The storm did by blowing harder against the cab until the seams whistled. The headlights chalked a shape ahead that took a second too long to identify. The mile marker itself, 2 digits clothed in ice. I realized with a hollow mathematical clarity that I had drifted back to the same place. The plow, the wayside, the sign. I had slid my length through the storm only to arrive where I started, like a man walking in a circle in deep snow. I laughed once without humor. Then I did what I should have done the first time. I set the brake. The truck sighed. The storm took the sound away like a tip from a diner counter. I switched on the 4-ways and killed the radio. "All right," I said. "We're stopped." She turned her head until I could see both eyes. They were not glowing, not special, not anything you could photograph and prove. They were just far away. "Thank you," she said, and I felt the gratitude in my molars like cold. I waited for the normal world to rush back. That's what happens when you do the right thing in a story. But the only arrival was a deeper quiet. Snow pressed at the glass. The heat clicked as the thermostat took its small breaths. The girl lifted her hands from her lap and touched the buckle with slow care. The belt hummed through the guide. The sound made me dizzy with relief. "Do you need me to call someone?" I asked. "There's a state trooper lives near here. Name's Mercer. He hates me but likes paperwork." I said it to keep from saying, "You aren't alive, are you?" "He isn't here," she said. "He never was." A horn bellowed from somewhere too near. I jerked forward on reflex. Headlights bloomed in the mirror. 2 low suns in the white. A truck was coming fast. The idiot kind of fast you only see from people who think big machines prove they deserve to live. I pumped the air horn and hit my hazards again and braced for the hit I knew was coming. The girl did not move. She watched the hazard lights blink. On, off, on, as if they were a language she had once learned and since forgotten. The other rig roared past without touching us, its wake shoving our cab sideways. For a second the wind died in the lee of it, and I saw the road across to the far shoulder, smooth as poured sugar. The ditch a soft sweep down. There, half buried in rime and drift, a black arc rose from the snow like the top of a wheel. A door frame, a sedan roof crushed in a shallow V. The shape was old, the way snow ages steel, rounded, forgiving, no edges. I knew without being told that no one had hauled it out because the road forgot as fast as the wind could teach. The girl's hand went to the latch, a motion so slow it hurt to watch. "Don't," I said, and hated how fast the word came, how selfish. "It's a whiteout." "You'll step wrong." "It's not wrong," she said. "It's where I go." "Stay," I said. "Stay and we'll call Mercer. We'll write it down. We'll make it real in the way that holds." She smiled without showing teeth. "You think names hold. The wind holds more." She opened the door. No blast, no spray. The storm made room for the gap like a throat swallowing. Then white closed, swallowing the road hole. There were 4 of us and a 5th voice we didn't admit out loud. We were leaving a cheap rental in Moraine Flats, a clapboard place with a sagging porch and a neighbor's hound that barked like it was paid by the hour. The air smelled like pine and cold metal. The girls had crammed their backpacks under the back seat. Wool socks, instant oatmeal, a dented thermos, a deck of cards with a missing 2 of hearts. Matteo took the wheel because he said he drove smoothest on winter roads, though it was early fall and the asphalt still held heat from the day. I sat shotgun, keeping an eye on the fuel gauge like it was a timer counting down to something I hadn't named. In the back, Tamsin and Jody argued over playlists and whether we needed to buy tire chains this far from the passes. We had a map, paper increased because Tamsin didn't trust signals out here. She had highlighted the route between Fairbanks and Anchorage with a swollen yellow line that wandered like a river. My job was to call out mileage and spots to pull over if the windshield picked up a pitted star. We left after sunset. Headlights slid over black pines. The highway shouldered us like a quiet animal, tolerant so long as we kept moving. The rental car's heater ticked, blowing air that smelled faintly of dust. We had extra water in gallon jugs, a stack of peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and the kind of confidence you only get when you're 20, and everything still feels like it'll return to normal if you slow down and breathe. Mile marker 66 rose out of the road edge like a funny little grave. The metal was rust-pocked and leaned to one side. Paint scabbed from winters, the numbers stamped crooked. Tamsin commented on it, said 66. I feel like we should make a wish, and flicked one of the plastic bracelets on her wrist. The wish must have entered the air and gotten lost among the trees because no one answered. 10 minutes later, we passed it again. Did we loop back? Jody asked. She pushed her bangs out of her eyes and leaned between the seats. I swear that's the same dent. It's just another 66, Matteo said. Plenty of roads repeat mile markers for spurs or exits. It's Alaska. Maybe they did it weird. His hands were steady. He had long fingers and a knuckle scar from a bar door. The dashboard cast a soft glow over his jaw. I watched the odometer. It climbed steady. We weren't backing up or spinning the tires. The needle on the fuel gauge took a tiny step down like it was tired. Pine trunks flicked by. The black spaces between them felt broader than they should have been, more like doorways than gaps. Another 10 minutes and the sign came up on the right. Rust, lean, crooked numbers, the same unflattering angle like it was listening. Okay, Tamsin said from the back. That's the one. It has the bullet divot under the 6. See it? I see it, I said. You're sure? Matteo asked. We should check the map, Jody said. I marked this stretch when we planned. There's a long straight here, but not that long. We're still going south, I said. The odometer checks. I wanted to offer some logic, but it felt like throwing a paper airplane at the dark and expecting it to come back with news. We drove another 10 minutes. The heater breathed. The world made road noises. Rub of rubber, a whine when we went over patched sections. The ping of a stone kicked up from the shoulder. Jody unwrapped a sandwich and handed me half. The peanut butter glued to the roof of my mouth and made it hard to say, there, when the sign appeared again. The same lean, the same rust bloom like a handprint. This is the part where I should have insisted we stop, or the part where I should have told them about the whisper. It had started faint, a breath against the back of my neck even though no one sat directly behind me. At first it was a noise the heater might make, a tiny engine sigh. Then it separated into numbers quiet as tap water, counting backward like a teacher with a chalk stub marking the board. I counted too inside my skull, trying to match it and negate it. I didn't say anything. I wanted to be reasonable. It didn't feel reasonable to say the car had a 5th passenger. We're going to pull over, Matteo said eventually. He flipped the turn signal like the other side of the highway would care. Gravel crackled under the tires. He eased us into a patch of dirt that likely served as a work turnout. The sign loitered there, 2 car lengths ahead, patient as a person. A wind slid its knuckles under my coat and smelled like iron. We all got out. The sky had a thin smear of cloud across the stars. In the beam of the headlights, the sign's rust glittered. The back of the marker was tacky when I touched it, as if it had been wet recently. When I pulled my fingers away, there were flecks of orange against my skin that wouldn't rub off. Don't touch your face, Jody said. That's probably lead paint or something worse. It's just a mile marker, Matteo said. Let's go back. We must have missed a turn. Tamsin stepped past the sign and took 3 paces into the trees, her boots crunching needles. There's a path, she said. Kind of. Like a deer trail. Tam, Matteo warned. She pivoted in the light. Pine shadows striped her jeans. I'm not going in. I just felt like it was right there, warm. I watched her breath ghost out and vanish. Behind us, the highway gleamed butter yellow in the headlights and then disappeared into black. The whisper brushed my ear again, closer now, so close that my eardrum tickled. 63. I turned fast, and the pines did what pines do, stood there being trees, unhelpful as witnesses. We got back in the car. The heater gave a strained little cough as if it had been running a long time. Mateo checked the rearview mirror, then checked it again like it could show anything but the dark mouth of night opening and closing. We'll watch for any side road. Even a snowmobile cut, he said. Jody twisted her hair into a knot and held it at the nape of her neck. I keep thinking my phone's vibrating, she said. But it's in airplane mode. Is that a thing? Phantom buzzing? Mile marker 66, Tamsin said, sing-song like it was a dare. Make a wish, don't, I said. What? It's just a thing, please, I said, and didn't realize how sharp that sounded until I felt the silence afterward. Like we'd driven under a bridge where the radio drops out. The whisper got bolder. It didn't care about my politeness. 61. It carried the feel of breath, not air from vents, but breath from a mouth. It had no tone, which somehow made it worse. I couldn't tell if it belonged to a child or a woman or the thin throat of an old man. It sounded like counting rooms in a hallway. When we passed the sign again, I pressed my teeth together so hard my jaw ached. We're low, Mateo said a while later. His voice was ordinary. He could make anything sound like a problem we could solve with a list. Quarter tank. We should turn around, Jody said. For real this time. Turn around to where? Tamsin said. Her bracelets ticked against one another. She had rolled her sleeves past her elbows even though the car had gone cold. If it's a loop, we'll just find it again. We can at least try it, I said, because doing something felt like the only thing between us in panic. Mateo slowed. The car fishtailed a little on gravel. He corrected like he'd been doing it forever. The headlights swept through trees, and for a second I thought I saw a pale shape between trunks, something the light slid off of like rain on a plastic coat. But then we were swung around, facing north. The sign waited up the road, but of course now it was on our left. We passed it, now the backside, which also leaned, which also wore a rust bloom like a wound that had been there for years and would be there after us. See? Mateo said, relieved like he'd fixed it. Different angle. We'll get back to 67 and then we'll know. We didn't get to 67. The sign came up again on our right, then our left. The odometer kept climbing. The highway noise thickened, not louder but denser, a sound like moving through a swarm of things too small to see. The whisper went on with the numbers, slow as water through a clogged pipe. We stopped again. We argued. It felt good to argue because it was human and familiar. And as long as we did it, we were people in a car and not creatures in a snare. Jody said we should park and wait for daylight. Tamsin said we should walk the path she'd found because at least it went somewhere. I said we should honk, as if there were houses tucked behind the trees, as if any light would show itself and mean safety. Mateo spread the map on his knees and pointed at the highway line like if he jabbed hard enough he'd puncture the page and find the answer underneath. I'm hearing stuff, I said finally, and the others turned their heads like I'd opened a window in a warm room. Numbers. Counting down, sometimes behind me, sometimes near the floor. I hear it too, Jody said, quick, grateful, almost relieved at being second. Thought it was my phone. Or blood pressure. But I hear it. Tamsin didn't say she heard it. She looked through the windshield like she could will a different road into being. She had the kind of face that didn't know where to put worry without it looking like anger. 59, Mateo said, and that was when I realized he'd been hearing it longer than any of us. His voice went flat. Okay, we're fine. We drive until we can't, then we walk. We're not the first people to run out of gas in the woods. We drove. The road laid itself out, obedient as a ribbon someone kept snipping from the same bolt. The sign surfaced from the dark and sank back like a buoy. I started counting aloud to cover the other counting. When the whisper said 55, I said, 90 minutes on the road, maybe 2, even though we'd been out longer. When it said 52, I said, we should see a truck at some point. People work up here? Maybe not this late, Tamsin said. Maybe they don't work, Jody added. And no one wanted that sentence to finish itself. The heater pushed air that had no temperature. The windows fogged at the edges as if a face pressed to each corner and then leaned back. At 49, we saw taillights ahead, dim and distant. A red pair that rose and fell with the road like a heartbeat you could track. We shouted without meaning to. Mateo tapped the horn. The taillights did not respond. We gained on them. The red doubled, then tripled, then swam. I realized my eyes had watered. When we were 2 car lengths behind, I saw the shapes around them. A pickup, paint scoured down to primer, 3 bodies in the cab. They were too still. The taillights fluttered and steadied like a candle in a jar. Matteo flashed the brights. The pickup did not speed up or slow. The whisper said 47 with a little gust of satisfaction. We pulled alongside. The pickup's windows were fogged from inside to the exact same cloudy pattern as ours. The driver's head was tilted in a listening way. The passenger seat held a shape with long hair that hung forward. The third figure in the middle wore a baseball cap squashed low, brim cracked. When they turned toward us all at once and with the same speed, we saw our own faces where theirs should have been, not mirrored but borrowed, features arranged in configurations that were wrong by a finger's width. Jody with my mouth, Matteo with Tamsin's eyes. I realized we were not alongside another truck. We were alongside ourselves, in another loop of the same road, a parallel of the same choices, a smudged page laid over ours. Matteo swore, panicked, jerked the wheel, and our tires bit gravel. The pickup dissolved into trees. The whisper said 45 like it was tired of being patient. We're walking, Jody said. We're walking now. She unbuckled. Her hands shook so hard the belt rattled. We wait for daylight, I said, but there was no more convincing in me. The fuel light blinked on. It was an eye that didn't mean anything anymore. We took our coats and the flashlight and the water jug we could carry. The air outside was thicker. I could feel it press against my throat. The sound of the highway bled into the trees like it was being absorbed. Tamsin led us to the path. She said nothing while she did it, as if speaking would remind the road we were leaving. The path was real enough at first, 2 lines of dead grass and a faint depression where feet or hooves had moved. The whisper followed, a step behind us, almost polite, 43. I didn't want to know what would happen at 0. I didn't want to give the thing the satisfaction of me wanting anything it could give. My breath fogged the air in a series of counted-off pairs, in, out, in, out. Branches reached for sleeves and let go. Pines closed over us, a ceiling replacing the sky. We walked until our legs argued. The flashlight tunneled through the dark and showed us small things. A beetle working its way across pine duff, a plastic lighter without a wheel, a strip of blue tarp caught in a root. We didn't turn it off. We didn't want to know if the dark changed when we weren't looking at it. At 39 we heard it, a second set of footsteps that wasn't ours and wasn't on the path, staying just far enough away to be guessed at. When we stopped, it stopped after a courtesy lag of 2 heartbeats. When we walked again, so did it. We didn't call out. There was no need to invite it closer when it was already minding our pace like a considerate guide. We came to a clearing. Tamsin said she remembered this from a hike she'd done once with her uncle near a different town. A ring of stumps, a fire pit, the kind of place teenagers used for beers and guitars and secrets they hoped wouldn't follow them. We stood there stupidly, all of us waiting for the thing you wait for when you arrive somewhere. Some cue that meant arrival. Our breaths lit the air like small ghosts. The whisper ticked to 37, a metronome we couldn't break. I keep thinking I left something in the car, Jody said. My coat, but I'm wearing it. She pinched the sleeve like it could prove anything. Let's sit, Matteo said. He still wanted to make it manageable. He put the map on a stump and smoothed it. In the flashlight's beam, the roots looked like veins. I heard a soft chittering from the trees. It was the sound of something counting higher, not lower, a different math. I looked and caught a glimpse of pale, an arm, slipping behind a trunk. Not a person. The angle was off, the seam where shoulder met neck too sharp. The whisper from behind us murmured 35 as if soothing a child. I didn't say I saw anything. I still wanted everyone to sleep and wake and drive and pretend. We tried to nap in shifts. It did not work. The whisper discovered a rhythm that matched my pulse and then began to tap it. Not on my body, but in the air by my face. It paused when I opened my eyes. It resumed when I closed them. The footsteps took a break and then started again, looping the clearing, testing the perimeter like wolves testing fence posts for soft soil. At dawn, if it was dawn, because the light that came wasn't from a sun I could point at, but a thinning of dark, the path opened in the direction we hadn't come from. We took it because that's what you do. You take the path that looks like a path, the whisper said 33. The fuel light, wherever the car was, blinked in my mind. We broke out of the trees onto asphalt. For a second, happiness rushed up so fast it made my stomach hurt. The highway. The line down the middle painted a tired yellow. We turned left because left felt like not returning and because the sign to our right leaned in the way we recognized. Mile marker 66, Tamsin said, as if reciting a nursery rhyme you resort to when nothing else fits. Her voice had frayed just enough to show daylight through it. We followed the highway and reached the car exactly where we'd left it. Door shut, lights off, footprints crisp where we'd climbed the bank. The windshield was dry, though a damp had soaked my cuffs. When Mateo opened the door, the whisper lifted to 31, eager, welcoming, and then settled back like bed springs. "I dreamed we already did this," Jody said. We came back and the gas was full again. And we drove and never saw the sign. But when we got to town, everybody's faces were wrong, and I couldn't tell them what was wrong because I had their faces too. "That's just a dream," Mateo said, and then he smiled like he wished he knew how to say it better. We drove because even in a trap your legs move. The fuel light glowed steady now. I thought of our gallon jugs and how heavy they'd felt going in and how light they would feel when we lifted them at the end. The way an empty container is lighter than empty should be, as if some levity is attached to it. A buoyancy from not fulfilling its purpose. The whisper ticked through the 20s while the world stayed the same size. Jody touched the window with the tips of her fingers, then drew them back quick like the glass had a pulse. Tamsin held the paper map flat on her knees and traced the road with her nail over and over until it made a groove. Mateo sat forward like you do when you're trying to catch the wind in your body and push a car ahead. At 19, we saw a pair of headlights approaching. The other vehicle, a sedan with a roof box held on by webbed straps, slowed as it neared. I wanted to wave them down, to hand them a warning that would make sense, but you can't tell people their next hour will be a repetition. You can't say, "Drive around the hole in the world," and expect them to see it. I lifted my hand anyway. The driver lifted theirs, then they were past, and for 1 second as the beams washed over the interior, I saw a shape in the back seat that took up the space between us, leaning, patient, mouth too close to my ear. The breath of it had no smell. The lack of smell was a smell. 16, the numbers were getting confident again. They had cadence. The whisper had changed, or I had, and I could hear the other count now too. The one from the trees that measured upward. I didn't know what would happen when they met. It felt like a math problem we hadn't studied for. "Tell me something you remember," I asked suddenly. The need came out of nowhere. "From when you were little. Something dumb, please." "My grandmother's porch," Jody said immediately. She had a tin of buttons and a hole in the screen the size of a thumbprint and bees that got in and didn't care about us. "My mother's kitchen radio," Mateo said. It never picked up stations right, but she left it on for hiss. Said the house needed a person's breath. Tamsin was quiet longer, then said, "There was a boy who found a dead trout in the creek and wore it on a string like a necklace. He made it to the end of the block before my uncle stopped him." We laughed. It came out like a sound you might make while trying not to cry. The sign came and went. The odometer climbed. The fuel gauge slid under the red line and stayed there. 12. "I think we should stop and walk again," Jody said. "But not the path. The road, just walk it. See if it cares." "We can't walk all the way to town," Mateo said. "We don't even know if there is one anymore." "What else do we do?" I asked. "Sit here and listen to somebody else keep time?" The car made the decision. It answered history with mechanics. A cough in the engine, a stutter like a skipped heartbeat, then a smooth, terrible quiet. Mateo guided us onto the shoulder. The headlights stayed on a moment and then dimmed as if embarrassed. We got out. The trees listened. Far away, a jay or something like it scolded. The sky was not morning or night. It was a color old television screens made when you turned them off. The sign leaned ahead of us unchanged. I could have described its flakes of rust like I was trying to sell it to someone who cared about flaws. We started walking. The asphalt under our boots made a sound like skin on skin. We counted our steps to keep them from doing the other counting. The whisper didn't mind. It kept speaking in our ears like someone who's realized you're not going to answer but enjoys the sound of their own voice. We passed the sign. We passed it again. Jody started to cry without any drama, silent tears that fell and then dried in the air. Tamsin reached for her hand and didn't take it at the last second, as if contact might not be allowed. Mateo looked smaller, like a man walking away from a distant kitchen light that doesn't belong to him. At 5, we heard an engine behind us. We stepped into the ditch, all three at once. The choreography of people who have lived around moving things. The truck that came was large and clean. The sort of vehicle you rent when you're moving furniture or a life. A steel mug hung from the cab by a clip. 2 women sat in the front, their mouths moving around a conversation we couldn't hear. One of them had a freckle on her cheek in the exact place my sister used to, if I'd ever had a sister. I put up my hand. I meant to wave. It became a plea before I could stop it. The truck did not slow. The women did not see us. For a second, our reflections must have flashed across their windshield. 4 shapes in a shallow ditch. A sign leaning behind us. Pines lined like listeners. The truck went on. We stepped back onto the asphalt. One of the women must have said something then because they braked slowly, almost comically late, as if the road had to let them. They backed up careful, lights bright. They rolled their window down halfway, enough to be polite without committing to kindness. "You folks all right?" the driver asked. Her voice was ordinary and saved. Our mouths moved the way mouths move. We said the things you say. We asked for a ride to the next gas station. We pointed at our car, which was not there. The driver and her passenger looked at the place we indicated and saw trees. They looked at us and did not quite focus. The whisper at my ear breathed a 2 that slid into a 1. "We can take you to the next town," the passenger said. She put her hand to her throat, touched a small silver pendant that meant nothing. "Hop in." We tried. I put my hand out to the door. The metal was solid until it wasn't, until it felt like pushing on a photograph. The driver frowned, confused, like she'd lost her license at the checkout. The passenger's smile trembled and then steadied. The truck idled, waiting the way machines do when they're not smart enough to be part of the problem. "We'll catch up," Matteo said. He said it gently, like he didn't want to scare them. He stepped back. We all stepped back, but it didn't feel like a choice we made. "Suit yourselves," the driver said, "because there is always a point where ordinary people have to decide whether to drag strangers into their car." She made the safe choice. The window went up. The truck moved forward. Their taillights became 2 red coins, and then 1, and then none. 0 didn't make a sound when it arrived. It arrived like a pause that never ended. The whisper stopped because there wasn't anything left to say. In the quiet after, I could hear the other counting clearly for the first time. The one we'd ignored. The one that escalated in the woods. It reached us as a warm upward curl at the base of my skull. It was not malicious. It was indifferent in the way gravity is indifferent. We kept walking because it was either walk or sit down where we were and become part of the shoulder. The sign appeared ahead, ordinary and tilted, and for once I forgot to hate it. I thought instead of the tin of buttons, the porch screen, the boy with the trout, the kitchen radio hissing like a person's breath. The pines leaned toward the highway as if to hear better. The wind slid its hand over the road, smoothing it. The light changed in the trees. It didn't get brighter. It just changed. Behind us, very far or very near, a vehicle approached, its headlights 2 pale coins, steady and human in the way they held the road. I lifted my hand without thinking. It's what you do. You put your palm out to the future as if it will stop for you, as if it could ever see you in time. The headlights brightened, then passed through us, painting the trunks with moving white. In the wash of brightness, I caught a glimpse in the back seat of a shape leaning forward, counting, not down or up, but in a circle. The numbers turning with the road like a wheel you can't stand back from far enough to see. We watched the vehicle go. The sign waited. The pines held their places. An audience that never clapped, only listened, endlessly attentive as the road unspooled and took us with it. A ribbon pulled and never coming free. The storm had been chasing them for an hour before it finally swallowed the highway whole. Snow swept across the windshield like endless static, and the wipers squealed against the frozen glass. Greg leaned forward in the driver's seat, chin nearly touching the wheel, squinting to keep the faded center line in sight. His wife Marla sat stiff and alert beside him, cradling their son's puffy jacket even though Tyler was already zipped into it, curled in the back seat under a throw blanket that smelled faintly like their living room. The heater labored and coughed. The vents breathed warm air only if Greg kept the fan on the next to highest setting, a setting that filled the car with a breathy rattle like someone wheezing in the footwell. They saw the sign only when the high beams were practically pressed against it. Rest area, it said, white letters on a blue rectangle, half devoured by ice. An arrow pointed off to the right. Greg glanced at Marla and saw her nod before she actually did it. He eased the car down the exit lane, tires crunching over crusted snow. The rest stopped crouched in the dark like an old shoebox left out in winter. Flat roof, square corners, metal-framed windows iced into opaque blocks. One street lamp stood watch, its head bowed under a collar of rime. The pavement of the lot had been patched so many times it looked like a fraying quilt. No other cars. No tracks but their own. 5 minutes, Greg said, as if saying it would keep the engine from dying. Bathrooms, stretch, maybe a drink. It looks closed, Marla said. Tyler stirred, rubbed his nose with the back of a mitten and peered through the fog a kid's breath leaves on glass. Is this the place with the maps you said? I want to see how far we are. Almost to Sable Junction, Greg said automatically. Sable Junction was not on any map Tyler had read, because Greg had invented it to give shape to the blank distance. We'll be there before breakfast. The car protested when he killed the headlights. The world narrowed to the weak glow of the single lamp. They stepped out into air that felt like something solid. Snow squeaked under their boots. The wind made a sound like a long, closed-mouth whistle coming from everywhere at once. Greg locked the car out of habit, then unlocked it again to make sure the lock had actually engaged. His fingers already felt clumsy. A flat-top roof overhang ran the length of the building. Beneath it, a metal door with a push bar waited, its narrow window slick with wind-blown frost. Greg pressed the bar and the door opened on the kind of smell every roadside bathroom shares. Disinfectant that never quite wins, old mop water, a tang of paper towels. But underneath there was another scent, softer, stale, and sweet. Machine sugar, like the back aisle of a grocery store where the soda bottles go. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a keening electrical mosquito whine. The room beyond was larger than he expected. The right wall held a row of vending machines set side by side like aquarium tanks. Drinks, candy, chips, a cracked glass front on the coffee machine. The center of the room was empty linoleum. Beyond that, a short hallway with a sign pointing left for women and right for men. To the left, another door with an exit sign glowing weakly above it. The red letters washed out to something closer to pink. It's open, Marla said, a little relieved laugh escaping her. Thank God. Her voice sounded too loud in the hum. Tyler went straight for the machines. Even kids who claim to hate driving cannot resist the little theater of a snack behind glass. Rows and spirals and coils, each holding a promise that might stick. You've got $2, Greg said, patting his pocket for coins even as he realized the machines took bills and cards. Make it count. I've got to... He jerked his thumb toward the men's room. He hadn't meant to drink that much coffee at the last gas station, but the cup had been hot and his hands had been cold. I'll take him, Marla said, nodding at Tyler. Ladies first, please. I'm not a lady, Tyler said, but he went with her, trailing his glove fingers along the square-tiled wall like he was playing an instrument only he could hear. Greg took a step toward the machines and noticed the wall opposite them for the first time. It was corkboard. No, a dozen corkboards, pushed together and framed in thin wood, making a patchwork that covered nearly the length of the room. Pushpins in all colors dotted them like candy confetti, and under the pins, Polaroids. Hundreds of Polaroid photos, some new enough that they still held the slippery, glossy look of fresh plastic. Some so old the colors had cooked into that strange orange-brown that turns faces into bruised peaches. The pictures were of people, almost all of them outdoors in winter. Coats, hats, steam from mouths, shoulders hunched. Most stood in front of this very building under that tired street lamp. In a few, the snow was so heavy the faces were more suggested than shown. In the bottom corner of many, someone had written names and dates and notes in marker. On our way to... Car overheated at mile. The long night of... The handwriting changed, but the words kept repeating. We found you. We waited. We'll be back. In the center of that collage, pinned with red tacks, hung a single Polaroid by itself in a square of space cleared for it. Greg stepped close because it had the kind of gravity important things have. It was newer than most. The glossy was unspoiled, the white border still white. 3 people stood under the street lamp, snow angel halos over their heads. A man in a dark parka with a frayed collar that had a patch he always meant to stitch and never got to. A woman in a knit hat with a pom-pom, holding a kid's jacket in her hands the way she held everything, gently, like it might break. And between them, A slouching boy with a blanket on his shoulders and a sleepy eye squint, both annoyed to be photographed and pleased to be included. Greg felt himself lean so close his nose almost touched the Polaroid's plastic when he understood why he knew them. "Marla," he said, and hearing his voice made the back of his neck crawl, because it sounded like the way he talked in videos of himself, not the way he sounded inside his head. "Hey Mar, come look at this." The humming of the fluorescent light seemed to get louder as if his voice had angered it. He waited, counting 5 in his mind. A dumb habit learned from short stretches of parenting panic to decide if you needed to truly worry. And then he heard the men's room door thud open behind him. "You see the coffee machine?" Marla said. "Out of order." "Of course." She stopped beside him. "What am I—" She didn't finish. Her hand tightened around Tyler's shoulder. Tyler wriggled away, not rudely, just enough to free himself from the reflex squeeze, and looked up at the wall with the gauzy interest of a kid who has seen too many blurry relatives in albums at holidays. "That's us," he said casually, more curious than afraid. "Huh, cool, who took it?" "We didn't take it," Marla said. She reached out as if to pull the photo from the wall, then stopped. The red tacks were sunk deep, making the plastic bow slightly. "Greg?" He heard her say his name and felt his own face arrange into calm. "Okay," he said softly, because soft voices soothe and he needed soothing as much as anyone. "Okay, maybe there's a ranger or whoever runs this place. Maybe they've got cameras in the parking lot," Marla whispered. "It's one light bulb on a stick." Tyler, thinking faster than the adults because that's what kids' brains do when given a puzzle with weight, walked to the glass door and looked out. The street lamp was there. The snow, their car. He put both hands on the door's push bar but didn't press it. "I can see the spot where we were standing," he reported like a lab assistant. "There's only us footprints. No others." Greg's eyes went to the vending machines. They sat in an unnatural neatness like appliances in a showroom. No smudges on the glass. No tape holding a rattling panel. No handwritten exact change only sign. The drink machine's top row held bottles with labels he didn't recognize. Blank colors. Generic words: cola, lemon lime, tonic, bitter, water. The chip bags had the same vinyl bright anonymity. Corn twists, fried slices, salt crunch. The candy bars were wrapped so plainly they seemed unbranded prototypes. Nougat, caramel, peanuts. He reached into his pocket for his wallet and found a neat square of bills he could feel even through gloves. He slid one into the slot. The machine swallowed the bill with the smoothness of something new, the display chirping, "Credit 100." He punched the number for water. He pressed it again because it beeped wrong. The corkscrew coil turned precisely, delivered the bottle to the bay with an obedient thunk. He bent to fish it out and saw a note taped inside the bay, a note whose tape had been put down carefully. No bubbles, corners squared. In a thin, even hand, someone had written, "Drink slow, do not finish anything." A joke, he thought. Or a prank. Or some traveler's idea of fun from a year ago that nobody had bothered to remove. He twisted the cap. The water inside didn't slosh. It hung heavy like syrup and then moved reluctantly. He put it to his lips and felt a faint taste of plastic. Ike pink fluorescent light keeps everything a little sweet. He swallowed, and the swallow took a long time to reach where swallows go. He capped the bottle. Marla's phone was already in her hand. She didn't need to say no service because the way she was holding it, flat in her palm like an offering, said it for her. He dug out his own and watched a rotation of nothing bars turn into one, then none, then a ghostly E, like a letter from a different alphabet. On the wall near the restrooms hung a phone, the kind with a cord and a big blocky base, a number label under thick plastic. He lifted it and was grateful to hear a dial tone. He punched the number of roadside assistance from memory. It rang. It rang in the receiver. It also rang, he realized, in the hallway faintly, like a bell in another room. He put his hand over the receiver and walked to the men's room door. He pushed it open. The ring got louder. He stepped inside. The echo in there was bright and metallic. The phone was ringing somewhere above the ceiling tiles. He hung up and the ring stopped. They returned to the Polaroids because the human brain will return to its most pressing itch. Marla scanned the outer pictures. Names she didn't know. A family with a dog and a tiny sweater. A woman alone holding a key fob like a talisman. A bundled-up elderly man with eyebrows like snowdrifts. The notes were personal and also not. We thought we were the last ones out. She said to wait until the second light. We should have kept driving. In the upper left, tucked under a thumbtack, was a folded paper. Marla slid it free and unfolded it. It was a map sketch on notebook paper. The lines were faint and done with a ballpoint pen near the end of its ink. It showed the rest stop as a square and the road as a line, and then, as it went on, the single line smudged and became many. A braid, a tangle, before resolving back into a single line at the bottom with a tiny X that had a label under it. Rejoin. The distance from square to X was written in numbers she didn't recognize at first because they weren't miles or kilometers. They were hours. You can't draw hours, Tyler said, hovering over her arm. That's dumb. Hours are a distance, Greg said. If you're walking. He didn't know where the words came from. When he heard them, he felt as if someone else had used his mouth to say them and put on a good performance of sounding like him. Tyler found another paper, a half-filled sign-in sheet that visitors once used to write their names and hometowns, back when such a thing felt charming instead of like handing a stranger your itinerary. There were names and dots and a column for comments. On the last line, someone had written, "We saw our breath slow down." The pen had dug into the page hard enough to leave little bird ridges at each downstroke. Under that, no more names. Bathroom, Tyler said. Second time. Don't make me wait. Greg and Marla said okay at the same time, relieved to be given a small task, something solvable. They waited in the bright hum. Time broke into itself in that room. The sound of vents inside the wall came and went without changing volume. The red exit sign flickered and then held still and then seemed to breathe. Somewhere a compressor came on and pushed against silence. Do you hear that? Marla said. The machine? No, under it. Like faraway tires. Like the road is up above us and we're under it. He listened. The white noise hum separated into layers. The fluorescent lights, a higher thread like a sleek fishing line. The vending machines, a rectangle of tone you could draw with a ruler. The lesser breath of the vents, and behind all of it, so faint he had to hold his breath to catch it. A steady rushing, a river on a calm day. He put his palm on the floor. It was not cold, which didn't make sense. He tried the wall, room temperature. He tried the glass of the door, cold enough to make his glove squeak. Tyler came back dragging his feet to make a song out of the squeak. The urinal made a noise, he announced, deeply satisfied with using the word. Like a yawn. Also, the sink only gives warm. That's a crime. You'd prefer cold? Marla said. For the experience. He drifted toward the snack machine again, and Greg gave him another $1 because there was no sense pretending he wouldn't. Tyler punched a number for corn twists. The coil turned. The bag trembled and then jumped and then hung by a corner, suspended over the drop bay. Tyler jabbed the glass like kids do when denied by vending spirals. The hung corner tweaked but held. He looked around for the old trick, bumping the machine with a hip to jostle the row, but the machine looked bolted to the bones of the building. On impulse, he reached into the return slot where change comes clinking back. It was empty, of course, except it wasn't. His hand came out holding a coin Greg had never seen. Same size as a quarter, stamped with a mountain outline on one face and on the other a road that split into two, and then became one again. Cool, Tyler said, as if this proved a private theory. He slipped it into his pocket like a magician palming a card. Don't, Greg began, but the word felt small in this place. Tyler was already pressing another number, buying another chance for a spiral to loosen its grip on a bag of corn twists that looked, for a second, like a tiny orange life raft. They tried the other door, the one under the red exit sign. It pushed open and let them into a short airlock with another door beyond, the kind designed to keep heat in. On the wall in that little chamber was a poster. Winter safety. Wear layers. Keep extra blankets. Tell someone your route. The bullet points were familiar, but the little drawings illustrating them had an oddness. In one, a family huddled in a car that was just a rectangle in circles for wheels. The windows were blank, no faces. A caption said, "Stay where someone will recognize you." Someone had underlined that twice. The outer door opened without a fight. The wind came in with a dry hiss and they stepped out into an air that made their teeth feel like glass. The lot was the lot. Their car sat where they had left it, a little more fuzzed with snow at the edges, the street lamp haloed down. The world had the muffled, stopped-up quality of a snowstorm, the way sound travels only a foot or two before deciding it's not worth it. Greg felt a sting of relief. See? He almost said it out loud. After the lemon-twisted logic of the Polaroids and the note in the machine, the simple presence of their car felt like proof that reality remained available. But then a set of headlights slipped past on the highway. They were far enough that the snow made them smear, a yellow-white stroke, but he could tell by the speed that the driver had confidence. And by the way the lights didn't dip or pitch, that the road there was clear. The car went by and there was no sound. Or maybe there was, and the sound had to be filtered through this air and this hum and the glass they had just left. Another set of lights went by, then a long line of them, a convoy maybe, and with each one he felt the same strange delay. He raised his hand without meaning to, and the person in the car did not see him. He felt like a mime, or a man under ice. "Do you notice," Marla said, her voice small in the big cold, "how the snow is—" She didn't finish, but he saw it. The flakes near the street lamp fell straight. The flakes 4 steps away seemed to creep. The flakes over by the car were paused. Each little 6-pointed thing hung on an invisible thread. He blinked hard and they moved again, but slowly, as if someone had turned the world down to conserve power. "We should go," Marla said. "Look at me. And we should go right now. We're wasting gas not going." They hurried to the car. The doors opened. The seats were cold in the normal way seats are cold in winter. The key went into the ignition like it belonged there, which was a surprise, as if he had half expected it to refuse. The engine turned and coughed and caught and became a steady low growl. The headlights made the world into cones. He put the car in reverse and eased back. The tires rolled through the tracks they had made coming in and slid a little, found grip. He turned the wheel. He pointed them at the exit. He stepped on the gas. The car moved. The car did not move. It was not a stick in snow not moving. It was not a spin your tires not moving. The engine revved at a level that said we are not in neutral. The speedometer needle lifted half a hair like a shy child raising a hand. The world outside the windshield changed in infinitesimal ways. The angle of the street lamp, the position of a dark fleck in the bird mess of the snow, but the exit sat where it sat. He pumped the pedal, eased off, used the trick with rocking forward and back he had learned on a dirt road when he was 20. The car obeyed physics only in gestures. "Stop," Marla said, not because she believed they were in danger, but because she knew fear will write nonsense on your hands. "Stop, we're okay. We're okay." She touched his arm. He stopped. He put the car in park. He wanted to laugh. The laughter came out like a cough. "What if?" Tyler said, peering at the windshield as if he were at an aquarium hoping to catch the fish doing something private. "What if the road keeps going and we got off it? Like when you leave the moving walkway at the airport and you feel weird because your feet are still walking fast, but the floor isn't." "That's not how roads work," Greg told him gently, and then he realized he didn't know how things worked here. Their breath fogged the interior glass. The heater's fan blew. Outside, a smear of headlights went by in silence. A river of other people, none of whom needed anything from this squat concrete box with its humming lights and its secret wall. Back inside, the hum felt louder. The vending machines had warmed the room imperceptibly so the air smelled more of sugar. The Polaroid of them had not changed. Marla put her finger on the glossy surface lightly, as if pressing a thermometer's tip to a child's mouth. The red tax heads reflected the fluorescent bulb. In the reflection, the bulb made lines across their faces like bars. "Who pinned it up?" She asked no one, which was the only person who could answer. "Maybe it pins itself," Tyler said, only half kidding. "Like a printer, only for pictures. Like a, what do they call it, an instant thing. Maybe it spits out the picture when you come in and then you hang it because it tells you to and you're a zombie." "Okay," Greg said, a little too loudly, as if volume made sense. "Okay, this is a place for stopping." We stopped, we warmed. "We're leaving. We'll try the footpath to the highway. We'll flag someone. Someone will stop. People stop. We are people who stop." He said it like a pledge, like a promise at a ceremony where promises matter. He led them to the exit again. Through the poster room, into the hiss. They left the car where it was. The berm between lot and road was lower than it looked and higher than it needed to be. They climbed it. At the top, with the highway in front of them, he felt that same knot sound. A tractor trailer went by. He saw it, he did not hear it. He saw the white front and the dark rectangle of its grill, and in the driver's seat a shape, and it slid past like a toy on a string. He stepped down and raised both arms and waved them, feeling foolish but also full of a sick hope. The next car's headlights swept his face and left nothing behind. When they turned back, the rest stop looked farther away. The way buildings look smaller when you realize they're not the ones you meant to go to. The single street lamp's halo was a coin flicked in the air. The wind shaped itself around them in new ways, as if learning where they were. They went inside because there was nowhere else to be. The vending machines kept humming. The coffee machine promised cocoa for $1. On the corkboard, the Polaroids were the same and also different. The way a word you stare at for too long becomes a picture of letters rather than a word. Marla put her 2 hands on either side of their photo and stared, not blinking much, as if blinking would allow the image to switch like a trick photograph. Tyler followed the edges of the cork with his fingertip, tracing where one board met another, where the frames were joined. Greg stood in the center of the room with his bottle of water in his hand and tried to feel the moment the decision to stay becomes the same as the decision to leave. A click sounded, precise, satisfyingly mechanical. It came from the corner near the coffee machine. They all flinched in that direction. On a little shelf none of them had noticed, half disguised by an informational rack that held pamphlets about parks that might not exist, sat a camera the size of a loaf of bread. It was the kind of camera designed to make promises come true quickly. A slot in its front glowed faintly, as if it had been waiting a long time to do this simple thing. A square of white slid out and dropped onto the shelf with the whisper of paper finding paper. It lay there, a blank rectangle with the ghost of an image starting to decide itself. "Don't," Marla said, but Tyler had already moved. He picked up the picture the way you'd pick up an egg. He held it in both hands and watched the nothing become a something. Gray, then darker gray, then shapes, then faces. He turned it so his parents could see. He didn't smile. He didn't try to make a joke. In the square, someone had captured them at the top of the berm, arms raised, mouths open to call to a river that did not hear. The snow around them was rendered in dots. The street lamp behind them made a halo. Marla breathed once in a way that made a sound. She reached for the photo and Tyler let her take it. She did not pin it up. She pressed it very slowly onto the glass of the vending machine that had sold them water and warnings. It held there for a second with the stutter of static and slid down, off the glass into the catch at the bottom. She picked it up and placed it again. It slid again. The machine hummed, patient, watching. "Who keeps these full?" Greg asked, a thought so practical it felt like safety. "There's power. There's stock. There's heat. Someone comes to refill. There's a schedule. There's a person with a key and a badge who hates this route because it's out of the way. People hate and still do their jobs. That's what keeps the world running." "Does the world run here?" Marla said, not unkindly. They sat on the plastic bench that faced the board. It bent under their weight and creaked and then accepted them. The heater thumped on with the sincerity of a faithful dog. Greg unscrewed the bottle cap and sipped. He put the cap back on and tightened it until it clicked. He looked at the map again, the one with hours instead of miles. He looked at the red tax. He looked at the note that said "drink slow." He looked at the shelf with the camera. The slot glowed faintly again, as if it might offer another gift if asked. Tyler's coin clinked when he shifted. He dug it out and put it on his palm. The road on its stamped face forked and rejoined. The ridges of metal caught the thin light. He closed his fist around it and then opened his fist to show them a magic trick. The coin had left an imprint in his skin, a little road in the pink. "How long are we supposed to wait?" he asked. And there was no whine in it, only the clean curiosity of a boy who has learned that some problems yield to time. "Until the second light," Greg said, and the words came to him like a memory. He didn't know which light that meant. There was only one in the lot. But then he realized the exit sign counted too. Its letters brightened as if they'd been listening. They didn't try to sleep. Sleep felt like granting permission to the wrong thing. Outside, the storm eased. Or it didn't. The flakes fell at normal speed when watched and slowed when not. The highway kept sending its indifferent processions. Somewhere a trucker told a story on a radio they couldn't hear. Somewhere a child asked, "How far?" Somewhere someone else made a decision not to take the exit for the rest area, because the road felt good under their tires and their hands were warm, and the cup holder held coffee that tasted like a lowercase miracle. Inside, the vending machines hummed. The fluorescent lights buzzed and then did not. The camera on the shelf clicked at intervals that seemed random until you noticed how they matched the rhythm of breath when someone is trying not to cry. On the board, their picture in the center watched them watch it, and in the reflection of the lights on its glossy surface, Wide white lines crossed over their faces like lane markers on a road you follow at night, because it is the only thing you can see. When the second light brightened, the exit sign slipping from pink back toward red as if it were remembering its own name, Greg stood. He felt as if he were rising in water. He nodded at Marla and held out his hand to Tyler without looking. They walked past the machines and the map and the phone that would ring in the wrong direction, and they pressed the bar and stepped again into the hiss. The lot was the lot. The berm was the berm. The highway lay in front of them like a polished belt. They climbed and stood and raised their arms and joined the long parade of people who have tried to be seen by people who can't see them. The camera clicked in the room behind them, a patient shudder. The square slid out. On the wall inside, red tacks waited in the same places they had always been, making a little pierced crown around the center space where someone's picture belongs. And the highway kept moving without them, a smooth ribbon of light and silence, as steady as breath and just as easy to forget. The last time I drove that road with Nate, the sky looked like it had been turned inside out and hung in ribbons over the brooks. You don't forget a night like that, the air so dry it squeaked, snow that didn't reflect so much as swallow your headlights, and up above, a slow green fire sliding west like a patient river. We were hours north of anyone, past the miles where the county stopped plowing, past the little blue sign that said Standpipe 18, and the plywood gas shack where the heater always rattled like a loose box of nails. Nate slept in the passenger seat with his chin dropped to his chest and his orange knit cap pulled down to his eyebrows. A hunter's cap you'd buy at a store where the coffee tastes burnt no matter who pours it. I had both hands on the wheel and my eyes flicking between the road and the sky, between the white line and that high ribbon that moved like it knew I was watching. We weren't supposed to be out that late. The plan had been to hit the flats by noon, follow tracks until dusk, then drive back to our rental in Warden Ridge. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a sagging couch that tried to swallow you if you sat wrong. But the moose crossed early and we followed, and by sunset we were on a narrow 2-lane that was all frost heaves and surprise drifts, drifting ourselves from one conversation to the next. The heater on my truck, that old long bed that smelled faintly of diesel no matter how many air fresheners you wedged into the vents, kept the windshield just clear enough to see the road. I had a thermos between my knees with coffee I'd made at 4 that morning. It was lukewarm and bitter and felt like comfort, which tells you about the kind of day it had already been. "You should wake up and look at this," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. On nights like that, the truck cab becomes a chapel and you don't want to talk loud. Nate made a noise without meaning. I kept one hand on the wheel and nudged him with the other. "Come on, man." "Northern Lights." He cracked his eyes, blinked, and scooted his cap up with a knuckle. "Thought you hated stopping," he said. "Who said anything about stopping?" He lifted himself just enough to peer up through the corner of the windshield. The green ribbon fattened and thinned. Then there were sudden fans, palms of light opening and closing. Then a spill of violet like someone had tipped nail polish against the stars. The road ran like a black vein under it, empty as a thought. If you've never seen the aurora, it isn't like pictures. It isn't even like video. It's slow the way ice is slow. It happens big enough that your body understands it before your head does. You feel smaller and better at the same time. "Damn," Nate said softly. He scrubbed his face with both hands. "Okay, we're stopping." I pulled onto the shoulder by instinct and habit, watching the ice at the edge of the ditch, keeping the right tires on the gridded strip. The truck came to a complaining, shuddering halt. We clicked off the engine and the world dropped into a cold silence that was almost physical. Out there, everything makes a sound you can measure. The snap of a branch at 20 yards, the wing flap of a crow overhead, the distant whine of a semi that doesn't come because there are none, and everything else hums in a way you feel in your teeth. The aurora hummed. Maybe that's ridiculous. That's how it felt. We stepped out together, boots squeaking on the pack. Breath plumed in white ropes. The cold reached through the seams of my gloves like fingers. When I tilted my head back, the sky had deepened. The green struck a lower chord. If color can do that, and it wasn't a ribbon anymore, it was a ceiling. Mighty. Moving. "Worth it," Nate said. He grinned, and at this hour, with the white stubble on his jaw and his hat crooked, he looked 10 years younger than he was. He pulled his phone out, then tucked it back with a sheepish laugh. "Dead battery. We'll remember it," I said. The words hushed themselves because of the place. We leaned against the front fender the way you do when you're trying not to pretend you need the warmth from the engine block. The road ran away to a dark distance with a tiny hill at its end, and beyond that the smudged shape of the brooks, like the world kept going without permission. The truck ticked as it cooled. The snowfields on both sides shone with that weak greenish shine, and then we heard it, crunching like someone walking in new snow in slow, careful steps. Not right next to us, not far. A little to the right, across the ditch, on the low, drifted flat, where the wind lays everything the same direction. That isn't unusual in itself. Caribou are curious as cats. They'll nose scrapyards like they're shopping. But the crunching wasn't animal. It had a rhythm that was wrong for hooves. A long pause, a careful placement, a long pause, a wait. Nate lifted his head. I felt his attention shift. We both looked. At first there was nothing, and then the aurora thinned for a breath and my eyes adjusted and I saw a shape. Not a dark thing on white, which would have made sense, but a pale thing against pale. A figure like a person walking, only paler than the snow around it. As if burnt into the cold, it moved with a steady human rhythm. Past it, farther out, another. Then two more behind that. When the green slid, they slid too, a faint gleam along the edges of absence. "Hey," Nate said, not as a greeting. "Just the syllable you say when the world steps out of place." We stood. The wind didn't exist. The crunching came in unison now, like feet on a church aisle. The shapes weren't solid. If I tried to look right at one, it thinned like breath on glass. But running the edge of my eyes along the flat, I could see dozens. Maybe more. Maybe hundreds. They were coming from the same direction, the north, walking in a slow, drifting line under the green. There was no stumbling, no tripping, and no sound except those long, soft first, hard second steps of someone crossing ice who doesn't want to fall. "You said we'll remember it," Nate whispered. "I don't think we'll have a choice." I wanted to get back in the truck, slam the doors, crank the heater, put some oily distance between us and whatever this was. I wanted to say it was a trick of the lights. I wanted to point out how eyes do that thing where they add people to make you less alone. But my body wouldn't take orders from my brain. We stood like kids who think if they stay still enough, they'll turn to tree stumps. The nearest shape came to the lip of the ditch and stopped as if considering. It turned toward us. If it had a face, I couldn't see it. It had the suggestion of arms, of shoulders that lifted and dropped with the movement of walking. The green washed over it and the light parted around the form like it was a stone in a stream. My breath hitched in a way that hurt my chest. "Back in the truck," I said. My mouth barely opened around the words. The shape stepped down into the ditch without looking at the step. The snow didn't puff. There was no skid of gravel. It kept coming. Nate nodded so hard his cap slid sideways. We moved as one, and the relief of the truck door thunking shut might have brought me to my knees if I hadn't been halfway falling already. My hands shook on the key and I missed the slot twice. When the engine caught, the dash lights looked too bright. Nate stared out the windshield like a man at a window seat during takeoff. The heater wheezed, coughed, and then began to throw its damp breath. I put the truck into drive and eased us forward. The tires bumped off the grit and found the dark. At 5 miles an hour, then 10, we pulled away. The figures didn't hurry. They stepped into the churned shoulder where we'd been and kept on toward the road as if the road was something they had been promised. "Caribou," Nate said, trying. "White caribou. Albino caribou. That's a thing, right?" "Sure," I said. "And they walk on their hind legs and carry their shoes." It was a joke that didn't ask to be funny. He let it die, which made it worse. We drove without speaking for a mile and then another. The aurora changed again, like someone kneading dough. A slow fold and stretch. The violet giving way to green, giving way to a blue so faint I thought I'd imagined it. The humming in my teeth stayed. The road curved around a knuckled hill with scrub that poked up like black wires. I came around the curve and braked in a gentle, practiced squeeze because there were more of them. Not scattered now. A row across the lanes, shoulder to shoulder, turned toward us like a pale fence. I coasted to a stop with 50 yards between us. Nate put a hand to the dashboard like you do before you know you've done it. The figures didn't have faces, but I felt watched. There was a smell in the cab now that I couldn't place. Minerals, old wood, expensive cleaner after it's already dried. "We're going to go around," I said. As if this were an ordinary thing, I eased the truck forward, felt the steering wheel go light in my hands and drifted onto the shoulder. Then the edge of the ditch where drifts turned the world into slow shapes. The figures held their line. The ones near the edge didn't turn their heads. In my side window, which had the faint fuzz of years of road dust on its corners. They passed like bright absence. I didn't look long enough to find their edges. What if we just... Nate stopped. We should go back. We go forward, I said. It came out firmer than I meant. Maybe it was my dad's voice. His advice for ice, for debt, for grief. Keep moving. We get to the split, we hit the connector, we find the old way station, we sit there until dawn. Why would dawn help? Nate asked. I didn't answer. I didn't know. It was as much superstition as anything, the idea that daylight unriddles the world. The crunching had stopped when the row stopped. As we slid by, the sound didn't change. The row never turned its heads. We rejoined the lane and drove into a clear stretch where the plow had cut a straight path and the wind had been kind. I got the truck up to 20, then 25, and the white line returned like a lifeline. Who would stop? Nate said after a while. If you saw those. Who pulls over to pick one up? People who think they're people, I said. People who can't stand to see someone out in the cold. You think that's what they want? He looked again through the windshield and then pressed his back to the seat. No, don't tell me. There's a radio in the truck that's never worked right. You turn it on and all you get are preachers from stations that don't exist and hockey games whose crowds never cheer. I turned it on anyway. All we got was a hiss like winter talking to itself. We passed the blue standpipe sign and, like a miracle, right after you remember you don't believe in them, there were tail lights ahead of us. A small SUV idling on the shoulder, rear hatch up. One of those soft straps hooked diagonally across to keep the groceries from tipping. I lifted off the accelerator and let us coast. The hatch light turned the inner snow into an orange cave. Steam drifted from the exhaust. A woman in a heavy parka stood by the driver's door with one hand against the glass and one hand in the air, fingers spread as if to say stop or help or both. A small dog sat on the front seat watching her through the glass, ears up. He wore a sweater the color of new pennies. Everything about the scene, the grocery strap, the dog, the hand felt like a life we knew. Don't, Nate said, voice tight in his throat. I didn't. I veered wide. The way you do when you don't want to spook someone. Gave her room. As we passed, I looked. The woman's face wasn't pale like the shapes. It was ordinary, splotched red by the cold around the eyes. Her mouth moved. I couldn't hear, obviously, not through the glass and the hum and the ice in my own heartbeat, but I read the word help. And then I read please. They're not all... Nate began, and then broke off. Do you think... I think we keep moving. He was quiet a long moment. We're not good people. We're living people, I said, and hated myself for how quick I was with it. The dog turned its head as we went by and looked at us, and that image stayed in the rear view for a quarter mile. The sweater, those direct eyes until the road curved and they were gone. I might have saved a life. I might have condemned one. I'm not sure those are different things when the world is arranged the way it was arranged that night. The green light shifted again, lowering in some way that didn't make sense. It felt closer. The fan opened and closed. Static laid a hand on the hair on my forearms under my coat. I had a sense of something approaching from behind, like a weather front or the way your gut warns you before a trucker drifts because he fell asleep. A hill rose ahead. The tarmac went from black to gray. The rougher patch, the one that had been chewed by chains in spring, and beyond the hill I could see a distant line of poles from the old telegraph that weren't used by anyone anymore except ravens. Everything looked like the inside of a snow globe someone had shaken too hard and then held still. Look, Nate said. I didn't want to, but I did. The green didn't sit, it poured. Down the sky, slow and deliberate. It wasn't like it touched the ground. It was like it lay on it. The snow picked up its mood and turned a kind of underwater color. The air got heavier. My ears popped. If you'd told me we were passing under something, through a field of something, I would have believed you without asking for a graph. On the flats to the right, the figures thickened. They came like a procession now, walking parallel to us, then angling toward the road. Their movements never hurried. I noticed something I hadn't before. Some were small. A few were tall. One had the shape of stooped shoulders that made me think of my neighbor, the retired plumber in Warden Ridge who collected antique kettles and shoveled 3 doors at once when the snow fell heavy. On my left, out past the ditch, I thought I saw the suggestion of a long line stretching back toward the invisible river. They emerged the way the last stars do when you're forgetting night, quietly, as if they had always been there and the light finally remembered to show them. Turn around, Nate said. We passed the split, I said. My voice sounded even to me as if I had rehearsed it. Connectors ahead. There is no connector ahead, Nate said. There's Varsky Creek and a sign with too many bullet holes, and then there's the empty lodge with the plywood deer. There's a connector, I said again. You were sleeping when we... There is no connector, he repeated. And I felt the seat beneath me, the wheel in my hands, all of it click out of one groove and into another. We were in the same truck on the same road, but we were not looking at the same map. We came to the top of the hill. Something about the perspective made the world open in a sudden way. The north flattened into a plain that ran too far. The green lay on it like paint that had puddled. I could see motion everywhere, like a field with wind and tall grass, except the wind was this walking. In the rear view, the road behind us had grown pale with them. Ahead, the asphalt looked wet with light, oily, as if it could hold a reflection. We can't stop, I said. Who said anything about stopping? Nate whispered, and we almost laughed, the sound rickety and wrong. The telegraph poles were closer than they had been the last time I came this way, or maybe the green collapsed distance. I drove between two of them, and the wires above, still there after all the years, though they were supposed to have come down, sang. I don't know another word for it. A single low thrumming note. The figures stepped under the wires without noticing. The note didn't change. We crested the next rise, and on the far shoulder we saw another vehicle, angled as if it had tried too late to pull over. A dark pickup, newer than mine, with a decal on the back window of a fish skeleton and a sticker on the bumper about being proud of someone's honor roll. The driver's door stood open. The cabin light burned and made the snow a little golden cave again. There were no footprints I could see, but I wasn't looking for them either. As we passed, the open door eased toward closing in the windless air and then didn't. The headlights stayed off. The engine didn't smoke. I wanted to snap my eyes away, but they stuck like a tongue on cold metal until the scene slid by. Don't stop, Nate said, as if I'd thought about it. We didn't. We drove, and the green came lower and the world narrowed and widened in slow alternation, like breath, like tide. The figures far out on the flats angled in toward the road. Those closest to the shoulders came on as if they expected the pavement to catch them. When they got to the white line, some paused as if hearing something, then stepped out into the lane and continued across. Without hurry and without any of the caution living bodies learn around things that can kill you. We drove through them. That's the part I tell and don't, because it sounds like a lie. The first one we reached was a pale suggestion, a cold absence in the world. The truck didn't bump or hum. It didn't even whisper. But the cab got colder as the shape slid across the hood and through the windshield, the way fog does when nothing you do can keep it out. The cold was total and thoughtless, deeply impolite. My tongue went numb. The heater might as well have been blowing from another life. The shape went through my chest, and for an instant I tasted something mineral and sweet and not for me. Like the air at the bottom of a well that has never seen light. Then it was through, and the cab warmed half a shade, and the next one came, and the next. Say something, Nate said. Say anything. What? Anything, he said. If we keep talking, it can't... He stopped. He didn't finish with a can't what. He looked at his hands, and they were trembling in a way he would have joked about any other day. Pick a story, he said. Pick the one about the time you got lost on the ridge and found the blue tarp. There was never a tarp, I said, not under my breath. Yeah, he said. There was. We drove. I told a story about a man who walked into the place where his house used to be and folded the air as if it were laundry. I told a story about a morning in June when the light came sideways for no reason, and men on the dock at Bering River didn't look up. They weren't stories I knew until I said them. They came out of the green and the cold enough to keep our mouths moving. In between, I watched the hood and the line and the way the shape stepped off the flat and onto the road, without learning any of the things I had learned as a child. The danger of slick, the treachery of a drift that looks like a cloud. They didn't learn because there was nothing they needed from it except to follow. At some point, I stopped watching the rear view. Some part of me knew not to count what had come behind. Ahead, the road rose and fell. A spur road appeared on the right that wasn't on any map I'd ever seen. 2 tracks that cut cleanly into the snow the way a blade parts cloth. A sign stood there with a name that didn't settle, letters that slid. The figures ignored it. We did too, after an hour, or 5 minutes, or a lifetime. Time forgets you up there. I saw the glow in the distance that meant a building that someone had wanted to be seen from a long way off. It was warm. It was sodium. It was something that had looked at a catalog and picked the brighter bulb. My throat closed around relief I didn't trust.
That would be the way station, I told myself.
The one that was used when trucks were new and the rules were different. The one we'd camped in once when we were 22 and the water cooler tasted like someone had brewed tea with old bolts. See? I said. Nate nodded. It wasn't a big gesture. He looked older now and very tired. He rubbed his palms on his knees as if to make sure they still belonged to him. The dog in the sweater slid through my mind and was gone. We came around a low bend and the building rose from the slight shoulder like a ship on shore. Ugly and reassuring. A long rectangle with a stack for a stove. Windows with wire mesh door with a dent dead center where someone had kicked it once. The light came from fixtures under the eaves. The concrete apron before it had been swept by wind, clean of drift. The aurora sat lower here, pressing the roof and making the world feel like it had to duck. I'm going to pull under, I said. Do it. I eased us up and under and cut the engine and immediately missed the engine. The silence landed like something with weight. The green flickered on the hood, colors stepping across old paint like fish scales. The door to the way station was closed. In the bottom corner of the glass was a sticker with a harvest moon on it. That detail should be unimportant. It isn't. I stared at it too long and felt it begin to matter too much. We waited. Sometimes doing nothing is the only right thing to do. I watched our breath fog the interior and then thin at the edges as the heater's memory faded. The figures out on the flat kept coming, angling toward us as water angles toward a depression in a field. They didn't rush the building. They came the way everything else came, as if they were following a path laid down before any of us understood what roads were. Inside, Nate said. We go inside. I didn't want to. An empty building holds things. It holds a night you can't leave. But the cold in the cab had a reach. The windows were clouding from the edges in. The green light pulsed and the feeling I was being watched had shifted to the conviction someone was listening. As if all of us, me, Nate, the truck, the building, the sky, were in one big room and someone was in the next room with a glass against the wall. Okay, I said. We moved fast, as if speed could make a door more real. Boots down, doors open, doors shut, a few steps under the eave, a hand on the handle. It turned. The door opened like it had been oiled yesterday. The smell hit us, dust, old paper, something like a burned-out light bulb. Inside was a counter with a book for receipts the size of a small pillow, a rack for caps, a wall with a corkboard. Someone had left a poster about safe loads with a smiling cartoon engine whose optimism felt like a cruelty. In the corner, a metal stove with a blackened circle where soup cans had died. A bag of dicer sat slumped with a tear in its side and a hardened spill like sugar. On the floor next to the counter lay a pair of work gloves, leather, stiff with age, into a shape that remembered its hands. We shut the door, and the sound of the latch might have been the best I have ever heard. It didn't keep anything out that wanted in, but it kept our minds from thinking about that for another 10 minutes. Nate leaned his head against the door and then stepped away, embarrassed, without knowing why. I went to the window. The glass had that thick old wave in it that makes the world beyond it look like a forgery. Through it, the green sharpened on its way down, clarifying the figures, gilding their edges and their lack of edges both. They came all the way to the apron and then stopped, as if the light from under the eaves were a kind of fence. They stood in a rough semicircle, arms at their sides like anyone paused between thoughts. They want in, Nate said. They want warmth, I said. Same thing, he said, and that rattled me because it felt true. We moved like men in a waiting room. We walked along the walls, we sat, we stood, we opened a drawer. I found a packet of matches and lit the stove out of the stubborn faith that some things still work. The flame caught after 3 tries, the third time because I cupped the match with both hands and believed. Warmth bled into the room. The ice on the inside of the window turned to tiny tears and then to nothing. The sound of something, our own blood, the wire outside, settled into a steady note. I took off my gloves and put my hands near the stove and watched color return to my knuckles. Nate didn't sit. He stood with his back to the corkboard with the safe load cartoon and looked out in small glances like someone checking a patient. Then he did something I hadn't planned for. He lifted his hand and touched his chest above his parka, above the zipper, above the thick sweater underneath that, and he said, quiet enough I could have pretended I didn't hear, I think they're cold. I didn't joke. Everyone's cold, not like us, he said. The figures stood. The green light lowered like a conditional. In the far distance there were more. The line ran along the edge of the world as far as I could have seen if the world had not already ended. and continued without telling us. The smaller shapes moved a little, like children shifting their weight. Once the whole semicircle seemed to lean closer without stepping, like grass in a breeze that didn't affect anything else. "You hear anything?" I asked. "Like somebody singing down a hallway," he said without thinking. Then he looked at me. But there's no words. We waited. The stove clicked as the metal adjusted to its purpose. The warmth spread thin as tea. I laid my gloves near the stove to dry. That's when the knocking started. It was not loud. There was no fist. It was the sound of knuckles that don't care about wood. Of effort without urgency. 3 soft taps, a pause, 3 more. Through the window, the figures didn't shift. The knocking came from the door. Nate looked at it and then at me. "No," I said. "I know," he said. He put his hand flat on the counter and left it there, as if to anchor himself. The knocking came again, mild and patient. My name uncurled in my head the way it sounds when your mother calls you from 2 rooms over. Not angry, not sweet. It didn't come from the door. It came from the green. "I'm not opening it," I said, and the voice that answered sounded like mine and like the cold speaking through me in a way that made it unconvincing. "It didn't latch all the way," Nate said. "It latched. He stopped, put his fingertips to his temples the way he did when he had a headache. He took a breath and blew it out slowly, the way you fog a mirror to draw a heart. We listened. The knocking continued, careful and kind, as if we were already forgiven. I gave the stove more fuel. The room brightened to a level that made our faces look wrong. The poster's cartoon engine smiled like a liar. We didn't open the door. I wish I could tell you what time it was when the green began to thin. In my mind, it felt like a bargain struck. The figures at the edge of the apron began to drift backward, the way fog does when sun finds it. They didn't turn. A little at a time, their edges gave themselves back to the world. In the far distance, the long line that had looked like a fence of pale fires went down in sections here and there, like a city losing electricity without panic. The humming in the wire softened. The cold in my chest loosed its hand. On the stove, a single drop of water appeared where there had been none and ran, leaving a clean track. Nate exhaled a long, long breath. He leaned his head back against the corkboard and closed his eyes. "We made it," he said and smiled, a small thing that didn't trust itself yet. "Don't say that," I said. "Why not?" "We haven't left," I said. He opened his eyes and nodded. "Then say it," he said. "Say the thing about going forward." I did. I said it like a prayer. We watched the green lift, not disappear, not end, but go higher in a way that felt like the sky had permission to be what it had been before. The figures thinned, and then were the suggestion of themselves, and then the suggestion of the suggestion. The knocking stopped. The silence that replaced it was not the same silence. It was a human silence, which is to say, full of panic and relief both. We waited longer than we needed to. We waited to make sure waiting itself hadn't become the trap. When we went out, the cold met us like an old friend, and I was grateful for that. The truck started, bless it. The heater coughed back to life. I looked back at the door, and that's when I noticed the detail that keeps me awake sometimes even now. The frost on the frame where our breath had hit it when we first walked in had melted and run and dried. Near the latch, it had run in 4 parallel lines, the way it does when fingers slide on glass. Whatever had asked to come in hadn't needed the knob. It had needed us to want it. We got back onto the road. The aurora lay high again, less river than scarf now, the violet more of a rumor. In the flats, the snow looked like snow again. The figures were gone. I felt something like guilt, which is not a word I use lightly and not one you can justify with logic in a case like this. We drove south the way people drive home from hospitals when the winter air has put its mouth on them, and they haven't decided yet whether to tell anyone about it. 20 miles down, I saw a plow coming the other way, a big county rig with the blade up because the driver was going back after his break. His cab light was on, and it made his face look like a portrait of a saint, serious and alone. He lifted 2 fingers off the wheel as he passed. I lifted mine back. He disappeared in the mirror like everyone else at night in places like that. At dawn, when the green had drained out of the sky and the east went that pale metal color that means bleak, we pulled into Warden Ridge. The rental's porch light had stayed on and made the front steps look like teeth. Inside, the heater took its time as if it needed to be coaxed, and then it came on in a long, ungentle sigh. We sat on the sagging couch with our boots still on and didn't look at each other. If we had looked, we would have had to draw conclusions, and there are some conclusions that still break teeth, even when you think you've softened them enough with sleep. "Coffee?" I said finally. "Yeah," he said. "I made it in the way I make it, which is too strong and too hot and with an amount of sugar that would embarrass me if anyone else had suggested it." The mugs clinked on the counter. The spoon made a sound like a small bell when it hit the sink. Domestic noises, proof that we had come back, proof that we had carried ourselves with us. We drank without tasting. When the mugs were empty, Nate set his on the table without looking and missed, and it fell to the carpet and didn't break. He nodded at the not breaking like it had been an experiment, and success had been unlikely. He went back to his apartment that afternoon. The sun came up for its 4 hours, scudding along the tops of the hills like a tired dog. I slept at odd times for the next few days, waking from a dream that had no content except a weight on my chest the exact shape of a small room, and a glass in the next room, and someone with their ear to it. The reports came the way reports do, the way word travels in these places, which is faster than your cell and slower than your dread. A woman with a small dog and an empty tank, a man with a decent truck and a habit of picking up anyone who looked like someone's son, a pair of tourists who'd heard you could see the lights if you drove far enough, and maybe they did. The plow driver, who turned out to be a man named Eric with 27 winters under his belt and a wife who baked bread on Sundays, saw a line of footprints on a field that has never held any prints in January, not unless it was caribou or kids making a snow angel. The prints ran all the way to the road. They stopped at the white line. That's the part he told me that made both of us look at our hands. "You know that messed up part?" he said. He didn't say messed. He didn't need to. There were more of them on the north side. He didn't believe in anything but his blade and his roots. I didn't either. We drank coffee that was too old and worse than mine and didn't look at the sky. He said he would take me up to where he'd seen them. He didn't, or maybe I said yes and didn't go. It's hard to remember the shape of your refusals. Nate didn't hunt again that winter. He said he'd sprained a knee, which I would have believed if he hadn't also started sleeping with all the lights on, and the television tuned to a cooking show with the volume on low. We went to work, did the things you do to keep days moving forward, paid fines for parking without a permit outside the market with the blue awning, bought the wrong kind of salt, returned it, bought the right kind. He bought a new hat. I threw away the gloves I had warmed by the stove even though they were fine, because when I put them on my hands felt like they had borrowed someone else's heat. Here's the thing I'm not supposed to say because it sounds like a flourish. They come when the lights come. I don't mean every night the aurora twines over the brooks you'll find a parade of the pale. I mean the very green nights, the ones that hum, when the air feels thick and the wires sing and the dog looks at something by the door and doesn't bark. On those nights, the dead walk out to where the people left them, ditches, flats, fields, edges, and find the road. They are patient. They don't pound on doors unless knocking seems reasonable. They want warmth not because they're cold, though they are that, but because the living are warm and the living have rooms and stoves and mugs that don't break when they fall on cheap carpet. The dead remember rooms. They miss them in a way that keeps the rest of us honest. You'll ask me if I would stop now. If I saw a pale figure under a sky like that, would I pull over and open the door and let the cold sit beside me the way a brother might? I would like to say yes. I would like to think of myself as good. I also want you to come home with your dog and the sweater the shape of a small body in your arms. And I want you to be the one who sets the mug down on the rug and watches it not break. I don't know how to have both wants. Last week the first good lights came back. The weather app on my phone, the one that is wrong and right at random like any other app, sent a banner that said KP Index 5 and my heart did a thing in my chest that wasn't dread but rhymed with it. I looked up from my porch and the sky was a green's first thought. Across the street, Mrs. Lauer from the duplex put out her trash in her slippers and then stood there with the bin at her hip and her head tilted back. In the apartment under mine, a baby cried and then didn't. The wires by the old substation hummed like a prayer. I shut my door and set the chain and sat in the dark with the television off. You could say I was being dramatic, but there are nights when you keep your own counsel because you know how to recognize an invitation. Around 2 a.m, those hours when the day feels like a rope you shouldn't pull, I got up and went to the kitchen because I remembered I hadn't put water in the kettle, and the kettle in these apartments has a mean way of making the last person pay for the first person's laziness. In the window over the sink, the cheap, thin glass thing with the vinyl handle, I saw two things at once. The reflection of my own face, older than I'd like, and the faint suggestion, out beyond the dumpster and the chain link and the black ridge of trees, of a movement that wasn't wind. Something walking slow, unpersuadable, following a line it had followed so many times it no longer had to think about when to turn. The aurora lay high and bright as a thought you had when you were 12 and have never been able to shake. I could have looked away. I could have gone to bed and set an alarm and woken to a day when the sky had remembered how to be blank. Instead, I stood with my hands on the sink's cold edge and watched the green for a long time. The glass fogged where my breath hit it. When the fog thinned, there on the inside were 4 pale tracks, parallel, clean, sliding down the pane 1 slow inch. Like fingers on the other side of the room I keep empty for myself, showing me the door and asking me kindly to open it. I was between jobs and between names when the road I'd been following sagged into black spruce and frost and became a rumor of asphalt. The map on my phone had turned to a blank gray plate 100 miles back, and the sky above the tree line had the color of a bruise that never heals. I'd promised myself 1 more hour before finding a pull-off and rolling up in the car with the back seat as my bed. But the fuel needle started sagging toward E and my breath was fogging more inside the cabin than it was outside. That was when the neon showed up. 1 pink and blue word pulsing through the trees like a lure. Open, it said. In the still air, it sounded like buzzing. Talk Junction wasn't on any sign I'd passed. But the word was spray-painted on a leaning plywood board nailed to the stump of some giant tree. Talk JCT, last gas. The sort of joke a town tells after no one comes to visit anymore. Past the board, the woods thinned and the road widened, revealing a gas station arranged like a stage set. The flat front of a low cinder block building, 2 clouded windows draped with plastic vines, an overhang slumped on 4 poles, and 2 old pumps that still had metal flip numbers. The open sign hung in the left window, buzzing. A flag of black plastic fluttered from one corner of the roof and made a small clicking noise whenever the wind lifted it. I coasted up to the nearest pump and killed the engine. The silence hit harder than the cold. You don't realize how much you depend on the rumble of your own machine to convince you you're not alone until you shut it off, and the sky steps closer like a stranger. I could hear the neon, a papery hum, and beneath it something else, wet like a clogged drain swallowing. The pump hose had the texture of frayed rubber under my glove. There was a bell tied to the door with a fraying string, and it rang when I opened it, a dull ring that seemed afraid of its own echo. The inside smelled of coffee, dust, and something that didn't belong in a building. The floor was linoleum long ago chewed into curling edges. On the counter sat a jar of pickled eggs that had bleached to a spooky white, and next to the register was a tray of shortbread cookies in plastic. There were postcards of a place called Clearwater Bridge, and a flyer about a missing dog that had faded to a pale silhouette. Behind the counter was a man in a quilted jacket, gray hair slicked to his skull like wet leaves. He looked up as if I were a sound he'd been expecting. Evening, he said. Is it? I rubbed my hands and blew into them. I need gas. I'll fill it, he said as if it were a law. All part of the service. I can do it. I fished out my card, an off-brand bank name that never worked in fancy places but always worked in lonely ones. The man shook his head. I'll fill it, he repeated, and it wasn't a threat. It sounded like routine. He slid the card into a terminal older than my car and watched the numbers think. When the receipt printed, the paper came out the color of tea. He tore it and handed it over without looking. His fingers were clean but nicked, as if he'd been repairing something that didn't want to be repaired. You're a long way from where you're going, he said. You know where that is? Folks think they do. Where you headed? Anywhere I can start over without explaining why. I smiled because saying it straight like that usually made people smile back. He didn't. He glanced past me to the window. The neon smeared his face with nightclub colors that didn't match the room. He reached under the counter, pulled on a wool cap, and came around. Car'll be full up presently, he said, as if promising water in a drought. I followed him out, the bell ringing again, and saw that his boots left prints dark as spilled oil on the frost. He lifted the hose, worked the lever, and pushed the nozzle into the mouth of my car with a tenderness that made me think of doctors. The pump numbers ticked. The smell hit then. Diesel, yes, but mixed with something sour that reminded me of a bait bucket left in the sun. It rose clean through the cold and sat in my throat. "Been getting bad loads?" I asked, and the man's mouth did a small movement that might have been the beginning of a smile or might have been something else entirely. "Product's product," he said. "Comes from wherever it comes from. Don't pay to ask." I waited with my arms folded, thinking of my seat rolled back, my jacket rolled up as a pillow, the way the cold would whittle me down while I dreamed. My mind does that when I'm tired, builds a smaller future and asks me to fit inside it. The man watched the numbers. He had a way of standing like a tree does after too much wind, braced but ragged. A raven perched on the far pump and peered at us sideways, then hopped down to the ice and pecked at something invisible. When the pump clicked, the man didn't draw the nozzle out right away. He kept one hand on it and looked at my face, then at the dark where the road slipped away. "I'll check your oil," he said. "It's fine." "Oil's oil," he said, and popped my hood with a knuckle before I could stop him. He lifted it and bent over my engine, breathing steam. I stood useless as he slid the dipstick out, wiped it with a rag, slid it back in, then out again. The rag had dark stains like fingerprints that couldn't be washed away. He closed the hood gently. "You'll make it," he said, and the way he said it made something small and old inside me want to ask, "To where?" He printed another slip somehow, maybe the machine did it by itself and tore it free. It had my total and under it a line that made me blink. "See you soon." The font was the same as the total, as if the machine had added it along with the tax. "Thanks," I said, "because there's a schedule to gratitude and we all try to keep to it." He didn't answer. The neon buzzed as if chewing a fly. I got into my car. The fuel gauge climbed, not to full, but to just under, like a promise not quite kept. I pulled out onto the road, slow at first because frost is a traitor and black ice is a liar. In my rearview mirror, the station stood like a pressed flower, colorless except for the open sign. As I came around the stand of trees that ringed the lot, the sign's glow slid out of view. The road fell away to a straight that felt longer than it ought to. I pressed the accelerator and the engine responded with a soft sigh. The needle drifted. I rolled up the heat a notch, listening to the small fan whir that always sounded like someone whispering. The trees thickened and then thinned and the sky swam with a chain of dim stars. Then the neon was back, caught between the trunks like a tongue between teeth. I slowed, confused, and then the whole station swung into view again as if I'd never left. Same leaning overhang, same plastic flag flicking one corner of the roof. The Raven, or its cousin, sat on the far pump and watched me land my car under the lights like a plane forced to circle. I put the car in park and rubbed my face with my hands. There was a pullout I could have used as an excuse, some little lane I might have turned wrong down without noticing. But the tracks in the frost were mine, and they led out and back in. The bell on the door rang before I touched it. The man behind the counter was exactly where he had been, his jacket zipped, his cap on his head, as if we had both been paused and then unpaused. "Weird," I said, smiling like people smile when they lose something and pretend they were done with it anyway. I took a wrong turn. "No turns for a long ways," he said. "You'll want to top off." "You'll want to top off," he said again, not unkindly, but as if he'd listened to this part of the conversation before. His eyes were a washed-out color, not blue and not gray, and they watered a little in the cold of the store. Or maybe because of the open jar of pickled eggs. He ran my card without asking, and the machine accepted it, humming. The receipt printed. He handed it to me, and under the total was a new line. Almost there. Outside, the stink was stronger. The pump clunked in its cradle like something alive waking up. The man fitted the nozzle and began to feed my car. I watched the numbers and tried to do the math in my head. Miles, gallons, ranges. I'm not good at math when I'm tired. Everything turns into short ladders I can't climb. I looked at the trees instead. They stood dense and close, black as if their bark had been burned. "Where does this road go?" I asked. He didn't answer. He had the nozzle in one hand and his other hand was curled under the hose like he could feel something moving inside it. Not fuel. Something that pushed back. The open sign buzzed and the letters seemed to breathe. The pump clicked off and the man squeezed again and coaxed more. I leaned down and sniffed at the mouth of my car and almost gagged. Not rot like a dead thing. Rot like a wet thing kept in a warm place too long, like compost that had learned to want. "You smell that?" I said. "Some folks notice," he replied. "Some don't. What is it?" "Same as it ever was," he said. You heading anywhere with a name? I thought of a city whose name I'd said too often in the last year, and a woman who would turn her face if I said it again. No, I said. Just out, he printed the slip. Under the total, don't look back. I didn't want to pretend anymore that any of this was normal. How many people come through here? I asked, honestly. Enough, he said. It's not a busy route, but folks find it. How do they find it? The same way birds find power lines. He pulled the nozzle and hung it with a click. You're burning light. Best go. I went because what else was there? The tires crunched and the car's shadow slid along the frost like an animal sniffing for a place to lie down. I told myself that if I saw the neon again, I'd stop in the middle of the road and walk into the trees. I'd live there if I had to. I'd dig a hole in the snow and sleep and wake with needles in my hair. I promised myself strange things because it made me feel like I owned my next moment. The neon found me quicker this time. It bloomed around the curve like a bruise flowering. I brought the car to a full stop just shy of the lot, heart drumming, breath leaving a smoked halo on the windshield. The station sat patient, unmoved by my panic. The open sign never changed cadence. The overhang dripped a thin fringe of icicles that looked like teeth from the right angle. I put the car in reverse and backed up until the trees took the neon away. Then I turned the wheel and tried to nose the car into the ditch, aiming for the shadows between trunks. The ground under the frost went from firm to soft in one tire's breadth, and the front end dipped. I gave it careful throttle and felt the wheels spin. The smell seeped through the vents in a soft wave, as if the car were inhaling and exhaling that scent now. I shifted back into drive and pulled out onto the road, because you can only fight the shape of a thing for so long before you give in to it. The neon beckoned like an apology. Inside, the bell didn't ring this time. Or maybe it rang and my ears didn't bother hearing it. The man behind the counter hadn't aged a minute, because minute is a city word and this place was measuring in something else. His cap had a tiny frost of something on it, not snow. Something like dust that had learned how to be cold. You knew I'd come back, I said. He cocked his head, same as the rest. He slid my card without looking. The machine took it as if it had an appetite. You'll want to fill. What happens if I don't? Then you'll run out, he said, and I hated him a little for being simple. He came around the counter and headed for the door. I caught his arm. The jacket under my hand was warm and strangely damp, as if he'd been standing near a humidifier. He looked at my hand on him, then at me. His expression was a thing that didn't belong here, almost pity. Listen, I said. Tell me the truth. I'm not trying to be clever. Tell me what this is. He eased his arm free and held the door for me like a gentleman whose house has rules. It's a stop, he said. Between places. You know what a stop is. The pump turned on by itself this time. I hadn't heard him flip the switch. The nozzle twitched toward my car like a snake following heat. The stink made my eyes water. When I looked up, the Raven was closer, cocking its head so far that one eye became a coin. Beyond the driveway, the woods pressed closer than before. The road out appeared narrower, as if shrugged by the trees. How long have you been here? I asked, and the man's shoulders lifted a little. Since the first spill, he said. Or before. Depends how you count. Do you live in the back? He smiled at that, an actual smile. We don't live anywhere, he said, and I didn't love that pronoun. We just keep. The pump clicked and clicked again and didn't stop when the gauge would have suggested it should. The hose pulsed under his hand. I realized my own breath was sinking to that pulse, and I forced myself to hold it. The taste of copper crawled up my throat. I looked at the receipt he had pressed into my hand without my noticing. Under the total, the printer had added more words. Getting better. I made myself say it. Is that fuel safe? He didn't answer quickly. He looked past me toward the woods, his eyes narrowing as if he saw an animal moving there, and was deciding whether it belonged to the station or to the trees. Safe enough to go as far as you're allowed, he said. Allowed by who? He seemed to consider telling me. Then he settled for, the way people do when they mean, you already suspect it and saying it won't help. I left without thanking him. The needle climbed again and pinned itself a hair under full, and a low shiver went through my car's frame as if the bolts were remembering being forged. I told myself to be faster this time, to get up to a speed that would shame any loop into braking. The road ran straight at first. Then the trees leaned and the frost rippled. The neon jumped between the trunks again, not like a sign now, but like an eye-opening. I could have screamed then. I could have slammed the wheel and pounded the dash and broken my own hand on the horn, and it would have been fine, because there wasn't anyone to hear. Instead, I did the other thing people do in places like this. I became polite. I turned back in. I parked at the same pump and shut the engine off and felt the stillness walk into me like someone crossing a threshold without knocking. The attendant, he needed a name, and I didn't want to ask his. So I gave him one in my head. Keeper was waiting with the nozzle already in his hand. He didn't pretend to swipe my card. He began to fill my car with the same attention you'd give to feeding a skittish pet. I watched him and tried to think if there had been a moment years back where I'd chosen a different road and could romance myself into believing it might have saved me. People love those moments. They make good stories, and stories make the rest tolerable. Then I felt the mistake like a cut in my gut, not for coming here, but for thinking this was about me at all. "I don't think you're a bad man," I said, and I meant it. I'd seen bad men. They had a different heat, a practiced smile. He lifted his eyes. "Is that the kind of thing you tell yourself so you can sleep?" "No," I said, I think you're like a fairy. I think you carry things across. Fairies take folks to the other side," he said. "We just keep them from going a side they're not supposed to." His lips weren't smiling, but something in his face wanted to. "You should get some coffee." I hate coffee. Folks say that until it's the thing that keeps them upright. He nodded at the store. "Go on the house." Inside, the air had warmed by some degree that didn't register on thermometers. The coffee pot was old metal with a lid that clacked, and the liquid inside had the color of trees at night. I poured a cup and it shook in my hand like it had something to say. I sipped and it was bitter and burnt and oddly sweet, and if I'd been less tired, I would have noticed that it tasted like the smell outside. I set the cup down. I wanted to walk behind the counter, through the beaded curtain that hung in the doorway there. But a tiny sticker on the counter, older than the counter, said, "Employees only," and the idea of breaking that rule felt as dangerous as stepping into a river in spring. I took a second sip. On the board above the register where prices should have been written, there were only words: sour, cut, trace, bloom. Each had a number beside it, the numbers not dollars, but something like dates or distances. My eyes watered again and I went back out. Keeper, I had to keep using the name or I'd start thinking of him as a sign or a machine, had the nozzle hung. He stood with one hand on my car's roof, like somebody seeing off a friend. His fingers tapped a small rhythm I recognized without knowing why. The pattern of the bell on the door. He handed me the receipt. The printer had gone ambitious. Under the total, hungrier. I laughed, a raw, scraped sound. That a joke? He looked at me with something like apology. "Always is," he said. "Every part of it. How many times will I come back?" "As many as it takes," he said. And it sounded like he was warning me not to think of that number as high or low. There are folks still circling. Made it through all sorts of weather. Get clever about it. Turn their lights off so the sign can't see them. Run dead quiet with the windows down and their eyes closed. Doesn't change what the road is. What is it? I asked, and I shouldn't have, but once you begin collecting answers in a place like this, it feels rude to stop. He stayed still long enough that I heard the open sign sift another fly from the night. "When you burn what you shouldn't and spill what you can't put back," he said at last, "you make a place. And because you made it, it knows you. It waits for the ones who already belong to it. Some folks call that justice. Some folks call it luck. We don't call it anything. We just keep." He looked tired then, not in the human way, but in the way a road looks after too many trucks. My hand shook on the door handle. I got in, I started the engine. The gauge gave me a needle that looked like a lie given kindly. I backed out, I drove. The woods leaned, the road narrowed. The frost sang under my tires. The station came when it wanted to. It always did. The fourth time, the snow started. A dry glitter that made the world feel like glass. The fifth time, the raven perched on my mirror and tapped the glass with its beak, and I almost let it in. The sixth time, I didn't stop at the pump. I parked in front of the store door and left the engine running and went inside with my jacket half zipped, like a man who had remembered a chore mid-sleep. "I don't want any more," I said. Keeper looked down at the counter like people do when a child says something that requires no answer. The bell on the string moved a little in a wind I couldn't feel. "If I stay in here," I said, "if I sit down in the aisle and drink your terrible coffee and eat all your cookies." Will the road stop asking me to leave? He raised his eyes. It will change what it asks, he said. Inside or outside, a stop is a stop. I'll work here, I said, and the sentence came out of me with no plan. I'll ring the sails or whatever. I'll keep the pots. I'll keep with you. He winced, an expression so human it made me soften toward him again. That's not how it goes. How does it go? He came around the counter. Up close, his face had the texture of someone cut from softer material and asked to hold a shape too long. He put his hand on my shoulder. It was warm and damp and very gentle. It goes the way it's going, he said. You'll get back in your car now. You'll go out. You'll come in. Until what? Until you can't tell the difference between the road and the station, he said quietly. And you stop asking. He walked me to the door the way a father might walk a reluctant child to the bus. Outside, the snow had thickened, filling the air with slow confetti. The neon haloed each flake as it fell, turning them into tiny open signs that winked as they landed. The pump was waiting with the nozzle resting in its cradle like a hand curled around a throat. I had a thought then that might have been mine or might have been something the station wanted me to have. What would happen if I pulled the nozzle to my own mouth? Would I be allowed past the trees then? The thought repulsed me, and underneath that, attracted. I got in the car. On the passenger seat lay the receipts I'd been crumpling and dropping and, without remembering, keeping. I smoothed one with my thumb. Under the total, the printer had added a small new thing, almost an afterthought. It wasn't a sentence. It was a name, mine. The one I'd been pretending not to use in case someone wanted to find me. I shut my eyes. I started to laugh. I started to cry. I chose neither. I put the car in drive. I didn't go fast. The snow made a soft tunnel, and I let myself sink inside it. I watched the trees pass like the ribs of an animal I was inside of. I smelled the smell. I listened to the soft whir of the fan. I counted the breaths between the pulses of the hose in my head without meaning to. When the station arrived, it did it without hurry. The way a thought achieves shape as you think it. The open sign buzzed. The black plastic flag tapped. The Raven watched with one eye, then the other. Keeper stood in the doorway this time, not at the pump. He had something in his hand, and for a foolish second I thought it might be a lantern or a flare, some tool for safety. It wasn't. It was the bell on its string, the one from the door. He had untied it. He held it above the threshold, and when the snow hit it, it made a sound like a spoon on a glass, bright and far. He met my eyes and didn't look away. You're almost ready, he said. His breath plumed and drifted into the store like the store was inhaling. After this, you won't need me. I don't want to need you, I said. He nodded, agreeing, not consoling. That'll help. I parked without remembering doing it. I left the engine idling and the lights on. The brightness made the snow look like ash. I walked to my own pump and lifted the nozzle before he could. It was heavier than I thought it would be. The handle was warm. Keeper didn't move to stop me. He watched the way a teacher might watch a student open a book on the right page. The hose twitched, then steadied, and the first trickle wetted my shoes. I thought of mold, of compost, of something that learned to want, and behind those, something else older than wanting and easier than choosing. I slotted the nozzle into my car's mouth. The smell rose in a soft sweetness that made the back of my head relax, that made the idea of driving away feel like the sillier of two options. The numbers began to climb, steady as heartbeats. I stood with my hand on the handle and felt the pulse travel up my arm and into my chest, sinking with me, asking nothing, offering nothing, just matching. Keeper stood by the door with the bell in his hand, and in the window behind him, the open sign breathed in and out, as if it were practicing being a lung. The snow kept falling. The woods leaned closer to here. My fuel gauge ticked upward to that honest fraction under full, never all the way, never enough to dare anything foolish. The pump clicked, a soft please sound. I left the nozzle in and didn't squeeze again. I looked at Keeper. He tilted his head the slightest degree. A permission or a benediction or a nothing. I hung the nozzle and heard the hose sigh, emptying itself back into a place I couldn't picture. See you soon, Keeper said. And this time it wasn't printed anywhere. It was just words like human speech. I went to my car. On the seat, the newest receipt lay quiet. I didn't want to look, but I did. Under the total, the printer had left a final line. Welcome. I drove out. The road took me. The snow softened the harsh edges, so everything looked like it had been wrapped for safekeeping. Fern-white breath rose in the beams and turned to small, glittering fish that swam in place. I kept my hands light on the wheel, the way you hold a sleeping child you've just returned to a bed. The trees parted and then knit and then parted. The car hummed its steady hum. The needle held steady and my mouth tasted clean. It took longer than before for the neon to show. I started to think maybe it wouldn't. Maybe the work I had done, the small kneeling to a larger shape, the agreement you make in your bones, had tipped something in my favor. And then the open sign came, patient and bright, rising through the dark as if from below, and the station unfolded itself like a hand. I didn't feel anything like panic. I didn't feel anything like anger. I felt a tiredness that wasn't hunger and wasn't sleep. It was the tiredness you get when you understand what a place needs from you, and you understand, too, that you can give it. Keeper was at the pump already, not rushing, not slow. The Raven shook snow from its back and watched from the overhang. I pulled in and cut the engine, and once more the silence stepped into my car and sat in the passenger seat like someone I knew. The bell on its string was back on the door, tied neat. As I stepped out, it moved a little and made no sound at all. And in the cold and in the quiet, I realized that from now on it wouldn't need to.